Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day to claim our long forgotten gold. Bilbo is both the protagonist of The Hobbit and also, I think, the most exciting card from the new set. It's a blue 2 mana 2/2, says spells cast from anywhere other than your hand cost one generic less. This is mostly meant to work with its attack ability. Whenever it attacks, not deals combat damage to a player, you may cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell from your graveyard, and if an instant or sorcery cast this way would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. Very notably, only the instants and sorceries get exiled when you attack with Bilbo, and it's my job as Aspiring Spike to look at new standard cards and say, hey, this is very good with Mishra's Bauble. Can just replay the Bauble over and over, netting you an extra card every turn for no mana investment. This is really, really nice. This gives Bilbo kind of a very high floor, where if you're not flashing back removal spells like Children's Edict, or if you're not flashing back good card draw spells like Flow State, you can just get a passive 0 energy card draw effect. I do think Bilbo is a really souped up version of Dreadhorde Arcanist. Dreadhorde Arcanist, I think, has always struggled in the modern format where you can only really flash back 1 mana spells. Trying to buff Arcanist power to flash back bigger stuff has always been kind of a problem. And also being blue instead of red is really nice because, as you may or may not know, the best decks to draw a lot of cards in are also blue decks, and blue decks are also the best at drawing cards, but they best utilize all of these extra cards because they're able to slow the game down with all of Modern's efficient counter magic. I'm really excited about this card. I think it's really good. I think it's mostly going to fit in Dimir Frog style decks. I think that this is kind of the best shell that exists to play a cheap threat and use its card advantage to win the game. I think having Bilbo or Psychic Frog on turn 2 is really powerful. Black removal, I think, is better than red or white removal for the most part at the moment. And I'm also really excited about it with Children's Edict. On turn 2, you can play Bilbo. You can spend 2 mana on an Edict, make them sack a creature, and then you can attack and flashback the Edict for just 1 mana and just kind of clear the board and let Bilbo start to take over the game at that point. Flow State is a card that I think a lot of people were very excited for coming to Modern, and it ended up not doing all that much. That being said, also I think playing really well with Bilbo, where Bilbo wants you to play a lot of cheap instants and sorceries. So does Flow State, and you can flashback Flow State for just 1 mana with the attack trigger. I think that that's pretty good. Although it is also worth noting that Bilbo does play well with Expressive Iteration. While the static ability doesn't discount the cost of iteration itself, it does discount the cost of cards you play off of the iteration. So you're going to want to keep that in mind. I think just a good value card. I don't think it's only a Dimir Frog card. I do think we're going to try to play it in a few different shells. One thing I'm kind of sad about is that with Prismatic Ending in white, you don't really get any advantage from the cost reduction effect, where you have to spend an actual color on Prismatic Ending. The actual mana value doesn't seem to matter too much. But that being said, I think Bilbo is a good card, and it plays well with other good cards in the Modern format, which is always an important formula. That might sound obvious, but sometimes there will be a good card printed, and it just doesn't play well with other cards in the format and just kind of has to stay on the bench like an NBA player who's got some off-the-court issues. So I'm excited for Bilbo. Going to be going in a lot of decks. Pure Steel Paladin is getting a new best friend in the form of Keely the Resourceful. These are two really similar cards. They're both 2 mana. They both let you equip Colossus Hammer for 0, and they also both draw cards whenever equipment enter the battlefield. Keely is a 1/2 instead of a 2/2, and instead of having this Metalcraft ability to let you equip any amount of equipment for 0 mana on your turns, if you have the Storied ability. So Storied is if you control 3 or more artifacts, legendaries, and or sagas. If you have Storied and you have Keely in play, the first equipment you play on a turn costs 0. So this is both better and worse than Pure Steel Paladin's effect, where Paladin lets you equip any number of equipment. That is much more powerful than just equipping 1. But Keely doesn't require you have the 3 artifacts in play. In fact, you can play Colossus Hammer on turn 1, and then on turn 2, you can play Urza Saga, and that'll count as a saga. And then you can play Keely, who counts himself as a legendary, and you can just equip the hammer to Keely on turn 2. Because the requirement for equipping is a lot lower with Keely, I think this is going to make Inkmoth Nexus kills a lot easier. Where you can just have a Keely and an Urza Saga and an Inkmoth Nexus in play, and you can equip the hammer to the Inkmoth Nexus and kill really fast. Which I think is important to be killing really fast in the current Modern format. Keely also not costing double white is a really big buff, where if you have those Inkmoth Nexus or those Urza Saga turns, it can be a little awkward sometimes to deploy a fast Paladin, much easier to deploy Keely. That all this being said, though, I think that these two cards are just going to play great together. And one thing that's exciting about being able to play 7 or 8 copies of Pure Steel Paladin in your Hammer deck is you can kind of confidently play one out and be more okay with it dying to removal because it's easier to replace. One thing about Pure Steel Paladin and Hammer is it's such a powerful card. You can draw so many cards off of it. You can make so much mana. But if it dies, your deck kind of crumbles a little bit, right? Because if the Pure Steel Paladin's not in play, you have a board of like Ornithopters and Midnights and stuff. But if you have this redundancy, to the effect, and all of a sudden it's easier to deploy a Paladin and be more okay if it dies. So I do think Keeley is going to be very good in Hammer. Keeley, I'm pretty sure, is going to be a staple in the Hammer archetype. Now, we do have to talk about how good is Hammer as an archetype going to be in the modern format. There's a lot to like about it. I think it's an aggro deck that's good against the other 3 aggro decks in the format. It's an aggro deck that's good against Boros Energy, good against Izzet Prowess, and good against Affinity. And that is a really cool dynamic. That being said, it is also, I think, more fragile than all of the other aggro decks I just mentioned. It's weaker to more individual pieces of removal. Maybe Keeley changes that dynamic some. But if we are entering a modern format that is just about speed, and you're seeing a lot of those other aggro decks pop up, I think Hammer can actually be an excellent choice. So it is one that I'm going to definitely be trying out. I think that there will be some metagames where Hammer is actually a reasonable choice, but it's not going to be all the time. And while we're talking about Hammer, I think we should spend some time talking about the Lonely Mountain. The Lonely Mountain is an interesting utility land. It enters tapped unless you control an equipment, and you can spend 4 and a red to tap it to make a 2/2 dwarf token. But this ability costs 1 less to activate for each equipment you control. So I think if you're playing a Hammer deck, and you've kind of flooded the board with your Colossus Hammers, maybe some Quarry Steel Cutters, Shadow Spear. This can be an interesting grindy tool to make sure you keep having creatures in play to potentially equip some of your equipment onto, which is really important. In Modern, sometimes Hammer can really struggle because your opponent kills all your creatures and you just can't get, your pants on your guys. Also very notable, the Lonely Mountain is a mountain. This is the high-level analysis and commentary you come to on this channel. Which means you can put it into play off of Arid Mesa, Scalding Tarn. So you probably only need to play 1 copy of this card to have access to it a lot in the deck, which is really cool because it is a land that taps for red. That's kind of awkward in Hammer because you have the double white and Pure Steel Paladin. That being said, Hammer is always should be a Quarry Steel Cutter deck in my opinion. So you should be playing red anyways. So I do think I'll be playing 1 copy of the Lonely Mountain in my Hammer decks, and I'm a little bit unsure how many fetch lands you want to play. Maybe just 4 Arid Mesa is plenty, because this is not a card you are often going to want to have access to that early. But I also don't see much downside to playing some Scalding Tarns. Maybe you're splashing blue for Consigned to Memory, and Scalding Tarn still gets Sacred Foundry and the Elegant Parlor. Seems totally fine to just play a bunch of fetch lands if you want. I like the Lonely Mountain. I think it'll be good in Hammer. I don't foresee the card being good almost anywhere else. I did look at every single legal dwarf in the format, and we're about an entire deck away from that deck being good, but maybe in 10 years the Lonely Mountain will be broken. While I do think Bilbo is probably going to be the best card, it's possible in like 2 weeks we're going to have playtested Key to the Side Door and say to ourselves, this card is broken, what were they thinking? It's a 1-mana artifact, and it has 2 abilities. 1, you can make a creature unblockable. You have to spend 2 mana and tap it. That is pretty good in your Urza Saga decks. You're always going to play this card with 4 Urza Sagas, and you can make an unblockable 8/8 construct and just steal some games. That is a pretty big deal. But the main reason why I think Key to the Side Door could be really busted is the second ability. You can spend 1 mana and tap it to discard a legendary card with the same name as a legendary permanent you control, and if you do that, you get to draw 2 cards. Now, this is really interesting because there's a powerful package of cards that exist in Modern that doesn't really have a home. If you're playing for Imri Lurker of the Loch, for Tomio Inquisitive Student, with 4 Mox Opals and 4 Mox Ambers, you have access to 8 really powerful, cheap 1-mana legends, and there's some other cheap legends you can play to flesh this out if you want, and you have 8 Moxen, and Moxen are really powerful because they cost 0 mana and they give you a mana. Now, while this package of cards is very powerful, it has 2 big problems. One big problem is fragility, where if your opponent is able to kill your Tomio or your Imri, a lot of times your hand is just full of like kind of useless artifacts. 2, you play so many redundant legends, you do have just some awkward hands that just don't really function, and then you have to mulligan really cheap, and that makes your deck even more fragile. And that's why decks like Affinity, that's why decks like Izzet Metalcraft just don't go all in on this package of cards, because it gives you It gives you too many clunky draws, and again, your build becomes a bit too fragile when you're all in on the cheap legends and the cheap artifacts. Key to the Side Door seems to solve all of the problems while also just being a very good card. This allows you to discard extra copies of Mox Opal, extra copies of Mox Amber, extra copies of Imri, extra copies of Tamio, to where you just kind of never have an awkward draw, and to where you're never just getting really flooded. That's another issue, is that when you're playing 8 Mox and 18 lands, you have 26 mana sources in your deck. And if you're drawing a lot of cards off of your Emery and your Tamio, a lot of times you're just drawing mana sources. And so this lets you filter through those mana sources in a really, really powerful way to actually find the action in your deck. When I first read Key to the Side Door, I thought it was just going to be like a one of an Urza Saga decks, and the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm talking about it, the more I think I'm just going to start it as a 4 of and kind of use it as my main draw value engine in these shells. And I'm pretty excited for it. The card also plays really well with Peter Parker's Camera. This enters with 3 film counters. You can spend 2 mana to tap it to remove a film counter and copy a activated or triggered ability. This does work with a lot of stuff in these kind of decks. You can copy Imri ability, you can copy a Saga activation, make 2 constructs. There's a lot of stuff, but in your Key to the Side Door deck, it just turns into 3 copies of 2 mana, draw 2 cards. 2 mana to draw 2 cards is really good. I guess together you're spending 3 mana to draw 4 and discard 1, which is pretty powerful. That's going to be a nice grindy engine. You're going to play 1 camera a lot of the time. You can play some extra legendary lands like Minamo and Odawara to also discard to Key to the Side Door, and I'm excited. I am excited. It also seems like you're going to have, because this is a really comprehensive draw mana engine, the Moxen, the Imri, the Tamio, the Bobble, and the Key to the Side Door, that's about 27 cards, 25, somewhere in that range. And so like that plus your 18 lands, it's going to leave you with about 15 to 17, somewhere in there, of like actual action, threats and interactions. So you can play like 8 big threats or 8 counter spells. You can play 12 counter spells and like 4 finisher threats. And there's a few different options. I don't want to get all into them, but you have a lot of flexibility in how to actually utilize the cards that you're drawing. So I'm pretty excited about it. I think that this could potentially bring a more controlling Imri Tamio deck into the fold. Inside Information has really captured my imagination. It's a black X spell. You exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play those cards this turn, and if you cast a spell this way, you have to pay life equal to its mana value rather than pay its mana cost. So this can give you a way to cast a bunch of modern spells for 0 mana. The power level is definitely, I think, kind of immediately obvious there. You know, you spend 5 mana on this, and you can just cast 2 game impacting spells and get really ahead. This can cost you potentially a lot of life points. It really just so greatly depends on what you're playing against, and it depends very much on what cards you're hitting. And so I'm interested to see, is Inside Information just kind of a good value card in black decks? I think the answer is going to be no a lot of the time, especially if aggro decks like Boros and Prowess are really popular, because these decks can pressure your life total to where you can't pay that much life. That being said, Boros is a deck that has a lot of life gain in it, so if you cast Inside Information and you hit Guide of Souls, Ocelot Pride, maybe you can just gain some life back. Maybe you can play Guide of Souls and Ocelot Pride in a deck that's playing Inside Information to give you a lot of life to pay to cast a bunch of spells for free. There are some interesting cards that work really well with Inside Information. I think one of the most obvious ones is Cabal Coffers. Cabal Coffers is kind of the card if you have a big black X spell. You want to sink a bunch of mana into it. I'm not necessarily in love with it, because Coffers decks often, they take a lot of damage early, and you don't always have that much life to pay for something like this. But I kind of do see the appeal of casting this for a bunch and just picking 1 or 2 of the best cards to try to stabilize. I think that the card is also very interesting with this card, Children of Corliss. This is a 1 mana 1/1 that says, sacrifice it, you gain life equal to the life you've lost this turn. So this kind of removes some of the downside from Inside Information, where you can go, you can just pay as much life as you have, -1 for spells, and then you can recoup all of that life loss with Children of Corliss, just letting you play a ton of stuff for free without worry about paying too much life. If you have multiple Children's, and all of a sudden, like, the first one recoups the cost of what you play, and then the second one goes even bigger. Or if you have multiple, you can go pay life, sack Children, pay life to continue casting spells that you hit off Insight Information and continue to go, which I think is pretty interesting. I also just really like Children of Corliss. I'm getting excited about the idea of getting to put that in a modern brew soon. And the card is also good with the best card in the modern format, Kozilek's Command. Just the ability to go. I mean, Kozilek's Command is just like the best mana generating card in the format, but you can just go end of turn, Kozilek's Command, like make 3 spawns, untap Inside Information for like 7. And that's going to be really good when you do it. And then, of course, like in your Kozilek's Command decks, you're usually playing Ugin's Labyrinth, and then Ugin's Labyrinth lets you play a big X spell faster. So I'm not exactly sure what like a Inside Information Kozilek's Command deck looks like, because it's not too often you choose black as your like base color in these Eldrazi decks. Maybe black green for Sowing Mycospawn, but it does sound pretty fun, and I'll probably give it a go. Okay, this card's not too complicated. Cantankerous Keepers, 6 mana 4/3, affinity for elves. Costs 1 less for each elf you control. When it enters, you mill 4 cards, and you put all elf cards from among them into your hand. Elves is an archetype that's very near and dear to my heart. It was an archetype that was kind of supported in MH3 and is kind of unplayable, or I'd say very unplayable right now in Modern. One of the biggest, if not the biggest problem for elves as an archetype is that it's actually just kind of worse than other green combo decks that exist. Like, there's not really much reason to play elves as an archetype instead of like a Badger Mole, Shang-Chi, Quarian Ranger, Ashaya combo deck, or a Slumbering Trudge, Fight Rigging deck. There's not really much reason. Like, the payoffs you get with like Priest of Titania and Heritage Druid are just not there compared to the power level of Badger Mole Cub and Slumbering Trudge. That being said, Cantankerous Keepers, this card is crazy good and actually makes me excited about just playing an Elves deck again. And that is the most important thing. That is the most important thing for Elves as an archetype, is it has to be as good or better than other like green ramp combo decks, because otherwise, what are we doing here? It basically casts Winding Way when it enters, which is actually a card I've played for value in Elves decks before. This was, years ago, but getting like a 1 mana version of this that cast it on ETB and as a 4/3, it's a lot of value. Cantankerous Keepers is a lot of value in your Elf stack, and I'm getting really excited about it. One big problem though is it's not a card that's going to help you recover from sweepers very easily, where you just can't cast it. If your opponent sweeps your board, you got this stuck in your hand. You can't like play it and refill very easily. So you have to be really proactive about playing it. It is nice that it rewards you for being proactive about playing it. It's nice it has high mana value. So if you can play it before Wrath of Skies comes down, it's going to stay in play and be able to attack your opponent for a bunch. So I'm excited for this card. We will definitely be playing it with Elves. I'm not exactly convinced that this card is going to make Elves better than the other green combo decks that exist, but this card is really, really powerful and is definitely a good step in the right direction for that. And we do have another value elf in the format in Elrond Moonreader. Elrond is a 3 mana 3/3. Whenever you activate an ability of a creature, you draw a card, and this ability triggers only once each turn. I had to reread this a couple times, and I realized, oh, this doesn't specify non-mana ability. I feel like effects like this oftentimes don't care about mana abilities, but if you have an Earthbent Badger Mole Cub, or if you have a Birds of Paradise, or an Elvish Mystic, if you have Elrond in play, you just tap it, you draw a card. And then on your opponent's turn, you can tap another one, draw another card. So if you're playing a deck with a bunch of mana dorks, Elrond is pretty easily a 3 mana 3/3 that lets you draw 2 cards on a turn cycle. It's interesting. I will say these kind of mana dork combo-y decks, they usually are interested in like something that's more proactive and fast, something that's going to give you a lot of value immediately the turn you play it, rather than something that you want to be in play for multiple turns. It also has an interesting ability: 7 mana, exile up to 2 other target non-land permanents you control, return those cards to the battlefield under to their control, to the owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. If this returned immediately, like if you could flicker immediately, there would be infinite combos where you would just be able to like make 7 mana with Priest of Titania and have an Agatha's Soul Cauldron in play, and then have Shang-Chi in play, and you just bounce your Quarian Ranger, and then you bounce something else like Disciple of Freyleis, and you're just churning through your entire deck, casting everything. So not that combo would necessarily be all that strong, but it seems like it's kind of a very odd value tool. Like, you can blink Badger Mole Cub and get another Earthbend effect. I don't know. It's nice to have, I guess, but it's a little bit of sweeper protection. If your opponent casts a sweeper, you can spend 7 mana to protect your guys. I'm not that excited about the ability, but it is nice that like I would be interested in this card without the ability. Just the rest of the text is good, and then there's some extra value for you. It does also seem like it plays well with the card Psychic Frog. You just go discard a card on your turn, draw a card, discard a card on your opponent's turn, draw a card, and kind of sift through your deck. I'm not sure if that's going to be something that makes the cut in any list, because I think a lot of these Psychic Frog decks don't have redundancy to make Elrond consistently good when you don't have like a Frog effect in play. But it is something. I could possibly see playing Elrond with Cantankerous Keepers and being a more value focused elves build. You know that Elrond is an elf, and you could like Court of Calling for it as a one of, and try to use it as a powerful tool with stuff like Quarian Ranger 2. But I'm not necessarily expecting this to make the cut that often. It's kind of like what I mentioned with Bilbo at the very beginning. It's like Elrond is, I think, kind of a good card, but it doesn't really work with enough good other modern cards, right? Like a 3 mana creature that can draw 2 cards on a turn cycle, every turn cycle is really good. But when you have to be playing like a bunch of mana dorks to do that, it makes building around it kind of awkward, because that's not usually what you want to be doing in your mana dork decks. So kind of like an NBA player who just doesn't jive with the rest of his team. That being said, it is a powerful card. I will try to build a deck around it, and we'll see if we get there. Okay, let's talk Goblins. I do want to say Goblins has got actually some pretty good cards recently. I've been playing some Jund Birthing Ritual Goblins decks, and I've been actually liking them a pretty decent bit. They have been kind of like I'll 3-2 like 2 leagues in a row kind of deck, rather than anything that's a big breakout. But anything that's kind of close and then is getting some new good tools, I think becomes pretty interesting. The most interesting to me, I think, is this card, Bolg's Company. It's a red-black goblin. It has haste as long as you control another goblin, which is it's kind of interesting that it has this ability where the ability itself, it has this ability: tap, sacrifice another goblin, add red-black. But you could never activate this. You could never activate this unless you had another goblin. So I guess it's just stopping you from attacking on turn 2. Maybe that's more relevant in standard, but it's like if it had haste, naturally, like it wouldn't matter for the ability, because you just couldn't activate it. But there, of course, there are a lot of good goblins to sacrifice. I'm kind of daydreaming about playing Mud Button Curse Tosser on turn 1, then playing Bolg's Copy, sacrificing the Curse Tosser, killing something, and then playing another 2-drop on turn 2. And then all of a sudden it's turn 2, and you've killed something of your opponent's, and you've spent 5 mana already, and then you have this in play next turn to generate some extra mana and some extra value. The card, I think, is extra interesting with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, where you're able to cauldron the company ability, and all of a sudden you're sacking multiple things every turn and making a lot of mana. Goblins, I think, to some extent, maybe has a reputation as an archetype of being like cheap little guys that attack and try to be really aggro. But the way that these decks play, in modern at least, is that they are full of value ETB triggers. It's all like ETB dice triggers: kill your thing, draw some cards, make some goblins. And this card, I think, plays really well into that, because these goblin decks have so much value that a lot of times you just end up being kind of choked on mana. And so almost a perfect card. I think if this card was like red add red on this ability instead of red black, it would be better. But it's okay. You want to be black in these goblin deck anyways. We don't just get a Great Goblin, we get the Great Goblin. This is a red-black hybrid 1 3-mana goblin. It's legendary, which is actually a really big bummer on this card. If this card was not legendary, it would go so crazy. I guess they knew that. It has 2 abilities. Whenever you put a counter on a goblin, orc, or army you control, deals 2 damage to target opponent. That's nice. You will get a bunch of damage in some builds with this card. But the main thing I'm interested in this is for the next ability. Whenever another goblin, orc, or army you control dies, you exile the top card of your library, and you can play it until the end of your next turn. It's kind of similar to this card, Runeveld Hordemaster. Whenever this or another goblin dies, you can exile the top card, and if it's a goblin, you can play it. It's a huge deal that the Great Goblin does not specify goblin on the card you can play. You can play any card. You can play an Aether Vial, you can play a land, or most interestingly, you can play Empty the Warrens. There have been some kind of Goblin Storm decks that I've tried to build in the past that try to use Skirk Prospector as your main mana engine, sacrifice a goblin, add a red, and then you're like trying to play a bunch of spells, draw a lot of cards, and then you cast Empty the Warrens after you played a bunch of spells, make a lot of goblins, and you sack those goblins for more mana. And so I kind of have this vision of using the Great Goblin, Skirk Prospector, and Empty the Warrens as an engine where you have the Great Goblin in play and you're sacking your goblins, you play Empty the Warrens, you make 8 goblins, you sack them, you make 8 mana, and you draw 8 cards, or effectively draw 8 cards for the Great Goblin, and you are playing more goblins from the top of your deck, you're sacking them for mana, and you're churning through your deck, and eventually you probably win with something like Pashik Mons, just whenever goblin dies, deals 1 damage to any target. And so this would be like a more like mono red build probably. Although I do think Bolg's Company would give you like some, it will give you some redundancy to the Prospector. But it's also weird if you are, when you're going off with Prospector, if you hit like a black card, you can't cast it. So it would be nice to be mono red. You might need the redundancy here. You probably want Cauldron to Cauldron the Prospector ability, and then like play Horde Master as some redundancy. It sounds really, really fun. It probably won't be that good because it's weak to everything, but if you just ignore that, you could have a good time. The last goblin from The Hobbit that I think might make a splash in Modern is Azog Moria's Ruin. 3 mana 1/3. Whenever it enters, you destroy up to one other target creature, and its controller amasses Goblin X, where X is that creature's power. And if you control that creature, you get to draw a card. So I think this card is a lot. Again, a lot of the goblin shells, like Birthing Ritual, grindy shells, where you're like sacrificing your stuff, getting into this battlefield triggers, and getting a bunch of value. This card plays really, really well into that. The ability to like sacrifice a Mog War Marshal, have 3 1/1 goblins in playing it to draw a card. A totally fine grindy tool that will help you set up some of your other goblins for power. I like the idea of just playing Mud Button Curse Tosser early, playing a Zog, sacking the Curse Tosser, getting a 2/2 goblin, killing one of their things, drawing a card. Seems like a good value play on turn 3. And then this card also just does kill your opponent's stuff. You just can go, hey, I'm going to kill your Psychic Frog. I'm going to kill your Ajani. I'm going to kill whatever. And they're going to have a little goblin. And I think that you don't care too much about them having, or maybe they'll have a big goblin, but if they have a goblin on their side, you care a little bit less about like a vanilla creature than you care about these hard to interact, complex, high ability quantity creatures that exist in the Modern format. So I think this card will be a good tool. It's kind of interesting where like the Great Goblin feels like more of a combo card, although maybe it ends up being a good value goblin too. Azog is like a pure value card, and then Bolg's Company is kind of somewhere more in between. So we'll see where we end up landing. But if I have to play 3 different goblins builds, you won't hear me complaining. Plunder the Troll Shells looks really innocuous at first, but the more I'm thinking about it, looking at it, the more I think it might just be a good Modern card. Pretty simple. 2 mana, draw a card, and if it was cast from a graveyard, you draw 2 cards instead, and it has flashback for 4. It's kind of an interesting blend of Consult the Star Charts and Think Twice, where this is a card you can just cast on turn 2 if your opponent doesn't play into your counterspell, or if you need to hit a land drop, or if you just have nothing better to do, you cycle it, and then on turn 4, you get a 2-for-1. Unlike Consult the Star Charts, you don't get that card selection. Consult the Star Charts lets you look at the top X cards of your deck, right? And if you kick it, you can look at you get 2 cards instead of 1 card. And in the late game, Consult the Star Charts digs so deep and it really finds the best stuff. Plunder the Troll Shells gives you no card selection, but it gives you 3 cards instead of 2 cards. And I think that is a pretty interesting dynamic. And I honestly just don't know how good or bad this is going to be until I play it. And I'm probably just going to try it in the Dimir shell a little bit and just see how it compares to Consult. At the moment, I kind of expect Consult to be better. That being said, I'm not 100% sure, and this is definitely one that can just surprise us. It just does draw you 3 cards, and you can break up on the cost. I think that that's a pretty big deal. It is also notable that the flashback does get discounted by Bilbo Thief in the Night, and Bilbo is a card we're going to be testing a lot. And if you have Bilbo in play, flashes back for 3 instead, which is pretty good, like a nice power up on the card. So I'll be looking to play these 2 cards together early, just so we can get the most reps in and see if like one or the other are performing better, and if they do end up playing as well together as I hope. Belladonna Took, 2 mana 2/2. Whenever a token you control enters, you gain 1 life. If it's the first time, it's resolved. If the second time, you draw a card. Third time, you put a counter on each creature you control. It's a pretty cool card, pretty fun card. The problem is, I think it only goes with the Voice to Victory, Ocelot Pride, Guide of Souls, Johnny Seasoned Pyromancer Shell of Boros Synergy, and like is potentially going to be like a flex 1 of or 2 of in Boros Synergy, which means I'm probably not going to be playing it on stream. I don't usually find here's Boros Energy with a small update that may or may not be good in the flex spot. I don't usually find that to be interesting testing very early. You might be a Boros Energy player, and I think I would recommend trying it. It could possibly be a good tool. It does seem like pretty powerful with Voice and Ocelot Pride, especially where you're just going to trigger all three modes a turn, sometimes every single turn, and draw a bunch of cards and put a bunch of counters on stuff. But I don't necessarily think it's going to be a big game changer, even if it does find a home here. Getaway Barrel is a pretty fun card. I don't think it's going to be quite a game breaker or anything, but I may try it. It's a 4-mana artifact. When it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you reveal the top 13 cards of your library. You put a random creature among those into play, and the rest of the bottom in a random order. Because you get a random creature, I don't think that this is a particularly good tool for cheating something into play in Modern. There are just better ways to do this, quite frankly. But I am my imagination is a little bit captured trying to play this in a Trash for Treasure Duretti deck, where you can Trash for Treasure it back into play, and it specifically it seems to work so well with Duretti, where if you hit Duretti off of your Getaway Barrel, which will probably happen pretty often with 13 cards playing this as a 4 of, when Duretti enters, you can sacrifice the Getaway Barrel and return something else, maybe a big artifact from your graveyard, ideally a big artifact from your graveyard. And then when you sacrifice it, you can hit another Duretti, and then that Duretti enters, and you can get the Getaway Barrel back, and then you can attack, and you can do it again next turn. It sounds really really cool. But I have a hard time imagining that this would be like necessarily a competitive Modern deck. It is definitely the kind of card that if an enabler gets printed for it one day, it can just be kind of busted. Like, say that this cost 3 mana instead of 4, and you could just use Goblin Engineer to tutor this and reanimate it and just get a new creature every turn. Like, that would be pretty good. But it costs 4, and there's not another card like Goblin Engineer that just lets you recycle it every turn, aside from Duretti. So we'll see. Again, I don't really have very high hopes for the card. It could possibly play better than we expect, and I don't know. I just kind of like it. Dane, Lord of the Iron Hills, kind of makes me feel like this is one of the big issues with Universe Beyond sets having just infinite legendary creatures. It's a 2-mana 2/2 vigilance, storied. If you control 3 or more artifacts, legendaries, or sagas, you have enduring story for the rest of the game. And it says as long as you have enduring story, creatures can't attack you unless their controllers pay 1 for each of those creatures. So it's kind of like a mini propaganda, ghostly prison type effect, but it's on a creature. It's on a 2-mana creature. And I think that dynamic is really interesting, and I would be kind of interested in building around this if it wasn't a legendary creature. And like this kind of effect is really nice against the Pinnacle Emissary decks, the Corey Steelcutter decks, the Ocelot Pride decks, the aggro decks that are pretty popular in the format. But because this is a legendary creature, you can't just try to have 2 or 3 copies of this card in play kind of passively. Maybe that's just like a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing that this card is legendary. But at the moment, it seems like if you can incidentally enable it, say like maybe you're playing a Hammer deck and you want to have this kind of passive effect because you find it to be really good in the Boros Mirror, you can play like 1 copy in the sideboard. So kind of deflating that it's just tough to really play mini copies of this card, but you could possibly think that this effect is really good in the few decks that you can play it in. The Lord of the Eagles reads like it's a really powerful card, but because it's legendary, like Dane, it's very difficult to build a deck around it, and it also I think asks probably a little bit too much of you to really get this going. It's a 9-mana 8/8 flash flyer. It costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control with flying. So if you have 7 power of flying creatures in play, it's a 2-mana flash 8/8 flyer. That's great, but it requires you to already basically have that much flying power in play anyways for you to cast it. And, if you have a big Murktide Regent in play, this is usually enough to take down a game of Modern by itself. If you have a big Frog, usually enough to take down a game of Modern by itself. And so it is cool that you can kind of win more when you're winning, but this is a card that kind of just does nothing when you're behind, which is very difficult for a big creature. Like, you want a big creature to be able to stabilize you on board. I've had a lot of people talk about how it's cool that if you evoke Subtlety while Subtlety's on the stack, you can flash in the Lord of the Eagles and get 3 mana discounted. And that is nice, but you do also have to have like at least 3 other power of flying in play for that to be too interesting. So I am going to chew on this some more because it is a really cool and powerful effect. if you can get it going. But the problem is it's hard to play like a million copies of this card because it's legendary, right? Like if it wasn't legendary and all of a sudden you could go eagle, 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 then I'd be pretty in. But the fact that you can only have one of these in play at a time is a bit awkward. I guess one thing that's kind of nice is if you have a Lord of the Eagles in play and somehow it's your only flyer because your opponent killed your Murktide Regent. If your opponent tries to kill your original Lord of the Eagle, you can still play a second copy and just keep the new one with the legend roll. That is kind of something I don't really have very high hopes for it. I also think this is just not really the kind of modern format where you're super incentivized to play something like this. Although I will say it does dodge like every removal spell. It dodges Prismatic Ending, it dodges Fatal Push, it dodges Unholy Heat, it dodges Wrath of Skies, it dodges Kozilek's Command. Although maybe me saying all this is just me saying that Murktide Regent is actually kind of a really good card right now, and maybe I should be playing more Murktide Regents. I am intrigued by Fateful Discovery. It's a 5-mana enchantment, which is a lot, and I think it's probably going to be a little too much for it to actually be competitive in Modern. It says whenever an artifact you control enters, draw a card. This is a super unique effect. The closest we have in the Modern format, at least that I could find, is Vidalcan Archmage. Maybe there's something else weird I couldn't find with my search. It says whenever you cast an artifact spell, draw a card. It's an 0/2. It is a mana less, but it's on a very, very fragile creature, and it says cast instead of enters. Enters is so much better because basically if you have Pinnacle Emissary in play, you get to draw your entire deck potentially. Pinnacle Emissary, of course, when you cast an artifact spell, you make a 1/1 drone token, and so these will also trigger your Fateful Discovery. So if your deck is full of like Moxen, Springleaf Drum, Ornithopters, Midmites, one, if you're playing all this Moxen, you can play Fateful Discovery really fast. You can play it maybe sometimes as soon as turn 2, maybe kind of consistently turn 3. And if you can play it, then all of a sudden you start to like filter through your deck and you can warp a Pinnacle Emissary. And then all of a sudden, every single artifact you play is going to draw you 2 cards and make a token instead of just drawing you 1. And then maybe you find like an Opal and an Emissary, and every artifact is draw 3, make 2 tokens, and then winning the game from that point's not too difficult. The problem, of course, is one, like your hands that if you build your deck around this with Fateful Discovery, your hands that don't have Fateful Discovery plus mana are going to be not that functional. Your hands are going to be really weak to Orcish Bowmaster, High Noon, Counter Magic, stuff like this, and it's probably just not a better plan than casting a fast Kappa Cannoneer. That being said, it is, again, it's a very uniquely powerful effect. This is kind of like the only way you could build this kind of deck that exists. And so it's kind of important that you know this exists and that you're kind of ready to go if another enabler or a card like this gets printed again to give you some redundancy. Maybe like there was like a 4-mana version of this that gets printed and you play like 4 of that and 2 of this. I like to highlight these cards when they come out because they're good for your deck builder's toolkit, even if they don't end up actually going in a modern deck right now. I don't really know what to think about Gandalf Goblin's Bane. It's a 3-mana 2/3. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+1 till end of turn and deals 1 damage to each opponent. So kind of a double prowess effect where you're both getting 2 damage from each mode here. And it has a Reckless Impulse, Seek the Beast kind of effect. Look at the top 2 cards of your library and exile them face down. For as long as they remain exiled, you may play them if you control a wizard. There's a lot to like about this effect over cards like Seek the Beast or Reckless Impulse that make you play them till the next turn. One, they're face down, so your opponent doesn't know exactly what you're planning or what you're capable of, and they just could stay in exile, and eventually you'll find a wizard to put into play and play it. And of course, you have Gandalf, which is just going to be a wizard for you. And so it's interesting that it's like draw 2 on layaway, because in modern, like a lot of times you don't necessarily have the speed to like play a creature and then cast 2 other spells. Like you have to be spending some time interacting. You won't always have your 1-mana Tamio. You won't always have like a random Snapcaster Mage in play. You won't always have time to play Gandalf to get something like this going. But you will eventually. And so if you're just gonna play this on turn 2 because you don't have another play, you're going to play the game as normal, this will eventually be a good way for you to take that card advantage and then take over the game late. I think it's not going to be too often that you flame shape on turn 2 and then Gandalf on turn 3 in the modern format. And again, it reminds me a lot of questing druid. So the questing druid is very similar, where you go. This is an instant speed, so really nice. You can go instant in the turn, exile top 2 until your next instant you can play those. This gets a counter instead of being like a mini prowess. I do think Gandalf's trigger is better. It's just interesting to compare these two cards, where I do think Questing Druid is kind of on the cusp of being playable in modern. I've had some success with it in slightly older modern formats. It's possible that this would be a good direction for prowess to go sometimes if you want to be a little bit more threat dense and a little bit grindier. I don't know. Gandalf is an interesting take on this effect. I will try it in a few shells, but I'm just kind of worried about how inefficient both sides of the cards are. It's nice that you do get both. It's nice that you get the adventure, then you get to play Gandalf, but is it going to be too slow for modern? My instincts say yes, but it is the kind of card that just could test better once you put it in play a couple times. So we'll do our due diligence on this one and see how it goes. Through the Forest Gate basically says win the game in Amulet Titan for 8 mana, although I don't think that that's probably going to be all that interesting, since by the time you could cast Through the Forest Gate, you probably could win with Escape Shift instead. It's a 8 mana sorcery. Look at the top 20 cards of your library, put any number of land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle, and then you gain 8 life. So if you're playing Amulet Titan and you have an Amulet of Vigor or a Spelunking in play, looking at the top 20 cards of your deck is definitely going to net you a lot of mana, because you're going to put those lands into play tapped and you're going to make mana off of them. And then you can use Urza's Cave or Teleria West to find a Summoner's Pact and cast a Primeval Titan or a Aftermath Analyst or a Cultivator Colossus, like whichever creature you need to win the game. And so some things that are interesting about Through the Forest Gate over Scape Shift are that it can be like a little bit more of a value card. Like if your opponent is able to stop your loop with your Zurin orbs, you can just like Scape Shift can be a little bit awkward sometimes. If your opponent like casts Silence in response to Scape Shift, I'd like Through the Forest Gate would be a bit better. Through the Forest Gate is also better than Scape Shift if you don't have 5 lands in play for the deterministic loops, maybe 6 lands in play. So like if you have a really fast hand that has like 2 amulets, like 2 grazers, Summoner's Pact, so like play this on turn 2 or turn 3, like it is going to be better in that scenario. So again, I'm not a big Amulet Titan head, but there are some advantages to Through the Forest Gate over Escape Shift and Amulet Titan. And like this card just does say win the game in your deck if you have an Amulet or a Spelunking in play. And if you don't have an Amulet or a Spelunking in play, it's like a 10 for 1, so that's still a little bit interesting, and it also gains you 8 life to like maybe stabilize till the next turn. So again, I'm not the biggest Amulet player, but I think that this is an interesting tool for Amulet, and I think it'll be kind of interesting to see, do people playtest this card? Does it show up? I don't think I'll likely be playtesting it very much, but this is one that just kind of could surprise you in that archetype. I really like this card, the Notary Hobbits. I don't think it's probably going to be good enough, but this is another one that may surprise you when you playtest it. It's a 5 mana 1/1. Whenever the Notary Hobbits enter, if they're not a token, you make 2 tokens that are copies, and the tokens are not legendary. And the Hobbits, they tap to make a colorless for each halfling you control. So this card does potentially just go really crazy if you have like Delighted Halfling in play. All of a sudden, this is something that's capable of making, and like by itself, it's 5 mana and it's tapping for they're tapping for a total of 9. And if you have Halfling, they're tapping for a total of 12. And if you have Shang-Chi in play, they're tapping for 9 or 12 or 15 if you have 2 Halflings in play already, the turn you play them. If you have Badgermole Cub, they're all making green mana and they're making extra mana as well. So I guess I should say I've been playing a lot of like a Badgermole Cub, Shang-Chi, creature-based combo deck. It's a brew I've been working on for like a year at this point, or like 9 months, something like that. And it's recently been doing well in events. Other people have been top 8ing challenges with it, and I've been getting some work in as well. And I think it's possible that you play the Notary Hobbits in this kind of Delighted Halfling, Badgermole Cub, Springheart Nantuko, Ashaya, Quarian Ranger combo deck. It would be like a one of Green Sun Zenith / Summoner's Pact tutor target. And I think the problem is you probably always want to get Ashaya instead. Ashaya just combos so easily, and Ashaya turns all of your stuff into forest, and that makes a bunch of mana too. But this card, again, the card is really cool, really unique, and I don't want to just like write it off immediately because the effect is kind of brand new, and I want to make sure that I cast it at least once before we rule it out. I want to talk a little bit about Riddles in the Dark. I don't think I'd be talking about it at all if I hadn't talked it up on stream, but I misread it and I just want to clarify. I do not think this card is good enough for Modern. It's a 3-mana instant. You look at the top 4 cards of your library, you separate them into a face down pile and a face up pile. An opponent chooses one of those piles, that pile goes to your hand, the other goes into your graveyard. So it's kind of the inverse of Sauron's Ransom. Choose an opponent. And for this one, they make the piles and you choose. It's kind of the inverse, where Sauron's Ransom, they put a face down pile and a face up pile. You get to pick. The other one, you make the piles and they get to pick. It's better if you get to pick. It's better if you see the 2 piles and you look at your hand and you say, okay, I don't need that. I'll take something random, or say I do need that. I'm going to take that. It's just way better when you get to be the picker. You also get the Ring Tempts You, which is kind of irrelevant in Modern. But I'll say like Sauron's Ransom is not really playable. It has occasionally popped up in some Modern deck lists. It's kind of like okay, and there's just usually better options. Riddles in the Dark is mono blue instead of blue black, so like that is a little bit of value, but there just are better card draw spells than Riddles in the Dark. The way I read Riddles, I thought it was just fact or fiction, but for 3 mana the first time. I thought I missed the face down pile part, and I thought that you could just see all the cards and you got to pick one. If that was the case, I do think this card would be really exciting. It's not the case. I misread it. Just for the few people who heard me on stream who might be wondering where this card I do not think is Modern playable. Usually in these videos, the bar for what I talk about is pretty low. Like, you may have noticed with cards like Notary Hobbits, Through the Forest Gate, Gandalf, Fateful Discovery, Lord of the Eagles, Dane, Getaway Barrel. These are cards that I don't really think are going to make a big splash in Modern, but they're cards that I think they could get there. It's like, when you don't really know ever how good a card is till you play it a few times, till you build a few decks with it, and then even a lot of times it takes you a few iterations to find the best home. And so like I think if something might make it, I do like to talk about it. And there were a lot of cards for this set that really almost made that cut for me. Like I almost talked about these cards, or these cards are cards that we've had discussions about on stream. And I do not think that these cards will possibly find a home. Bilbo's Gambit, Gollum Riddlemaster, the Queens of Dale, Woodland Weave Master, Eagles Are Coming, My Precious, Saxfield Baggins's Wizard Staff. A lot of these cards kind of look like they could be Modern cards. A lot of these cards have like compelling text, especially Wizard Staff, especially Queen of Dale. But when I'm chewing on these cards, I'm trying to like mentally build a deck for it, or I'm trying to find a home, I literally could not find anything. I literally could just not figure out a place where any of these cards would make that much sense in Modern. And maybe it's possible that these are cards we would have talked more about 5, 6, 7 years ago. But I think in 2026, these kinds of cards just are not it. I don't know. Maybe they all have some kind of similar quantities where these are kind of playing like very slow, grindy games where you're kind of expecting a format that lasts like 5 turns on average, but that's just not the Modern format we're living in. And it's hard to imagine that you would want to play cards like this in your Modern deck. And so I just kind of noticed that there were more effects like this, or more cards that fit this category in this set than there usually are. So I kind of wanted to just have a page highlighting this. Maybe, I don't know if this is an interesting segment or at all, but we'll see how it goes. As always, if you feel like there's anything I missed or anything you think I'm wrong, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Evaluating cards is always really tough, and I don't think that this was a particularly easy set to evaluate. In Magic the Gathering in general, effects are getting more complicated and the card pools are getting bigger, and just trying to figure out what is going to make the cut it's not all that easy. And so I really enjoy making these videos. I'm always really excited to actually get to the play testing and actually see what's good, what's bad, what cards can we maximize, what cards are going to get into our regular rotation as we're building new Modern decks over at twitch.tv/aspiringspike. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye.